If you want a nominee who is endorsed by all the rhinos, globalists, and demented never-Trumpers, crooked Joe Biden's biggest donors, then Nikki Haley is your candidate. The Democrats are supporting her because she's easy to beat.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was former President Trump in New Hampshire claiming Nikki Haley is out of step with the Republican Party. Haley is sticking to her argument that the country, and more specifically, Republicans, are ready to move on from the former president. Well, we're going to talk about that and many other topics with Joel Payne and Devin O'Malley joining us now. Joel is a CBS News political contributor, Democratic strategist, and chief communications officer for Move On. Devin served as the campaign spokesperson for Mike Pence's 2024 presidential campaign and on Glenn Youngkin's successful 2021 race for governor of Virginia. He's now the director for narrative strategies. Gentlemen, I want to play for you something that Ron DeSantis said last night, coming off of his distant second place in the Iowa caucuses. Let's quickly listen to that.
He's one of the most famous people that's ever been involved in American politics. And there's obviously a lot of Republicans that appreciated his policies, but you still had roughly half of the Iowa caucus goers that made another choice. And so that tells me that there is an appetite for a different leader.
Devin, we'd follow that under making the best of a rough situation. I would remind Governor DeSantis, though his math is correct, Donald Trump only won 24% of the Iowa caucuses in 2016. We bet 76% of the participating Republicans didn't vote for him. He got the nomination, became president of the United States. So getting half in Iowa is better than 24%. So, there is some history to be reminded of. What do you make of the Iowa caucuses and where DeSantis finds himself now?
Well, I think the governor of Florida is in a difficult situation, but he's not the only one in the race that's in a difficult situation. I was joking with Joel before we came out that maybe this is the last time we'll actually be talking about the Republican primary, because there is a sense of inevitability that is growing and growing with each day that passes by. And Governor DeSantis is skipping New Hampshire entirely. He's off to South Carolina. Governor Haley's home state. Governor Haley's in New Hampshire, trying to put some sort of pressure on President Trump. But even if she is able to get within a 10-point margin in New Hampshire, it's not quite clear what her path to victory in South Carolina is. So we've got this electorate. Yes, there's 50% of Republicans that are maybe open to a Trump alternative, but it's not quite clear who's going to be the person that can consolidate that, and none of the other candidates seem to be acquiescing to the other.
Joel, how does a Democrat look at Iowa, and what is it looking forward toward a New Hampshire primary?
I got to disagree with Devin. We need an extended primary. We need the President Trump, to labor over this nomination. I think what I see,
anything to distract from the Biden administration's failures, I suppose.
I will be happy to talk about President Biden in a second, but I'll just tell you this. I think Democrats, what they see is actually very similar to what Ron DeSantis said there. It is somewhat remarkable that the standard bearer of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, did only register half of a low turnout, low energy Republican Iowa caucus. I don't know if that says that Donald Trump can't win. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I think it does say that maybe we should kind of cool our jets a bit on some of the Trump enthusiasm syndrome that maybe got a little bit over our skis. And I think we need to recognize that this is still a divided country, but maybe more important and maybe more concerning for Devin, I think it's still a divided Republican Party as well.
Joel, there's about a month between now, a little bit more than a month, and the State of the Union address. What does the President of the United States need to have accomplished by then to have a State of the Union that is in any way memorable?
Well, I think he's actually got a lot to say about what's happened over the last 3 years. Obviously, we're in a political season right now, and I think things are probably...
But recentism is a real thing right now. People want to know what you've just accomplished, and there's a lot on the table right now.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think he is obviously engaging in pretty forthright fashion with Speaker Johnson and with other congressional leaders to try to get past the financial impasse that we're looking at with the federal budget. I think the president and his team have started to talk about the things that they want to do, lowering prescription drug costs, building on some of the advances of the first 2 years of the administration. So you're going to see more of that. But the narrative that they're going to be teasing out is the split screen, the compare contrast. Do you want the chaos that you're seeing in the Republican Party and what Donald Trump gave you, or do you want the stability that we present? And I think that's the case they're going to lay out.
Devin, jump in.
I mean, we talk about the chaos of the Republican Party. Joel, that's politics, right? And that's a lot of that is theater. There is actual chaos going on in the country at the southern border, in large American cities, across the country. That's real chaos. Those are real concerns that Americans have. And not one of those things was in your list of priorities that the president needs to accomplish or even discuss in the State of the Union. That's what's on Americans' minds. That's the case that he needs to lay out in the next few weeks, and he's not able to. Those are real failures on his watch, and those are real challenges that the Biden administration.
Devin, to pick up on that point, do you think by the time of the State of the Union in early March, the Republican battle for the nomination will effectively be over, and this immigration issue will be one of, if not the most aggressive charges against the Biden administration?
I do think. I mean, Major, I think it's effectively over right now, barring some real mitigating circumstances. But even then, I think it's effectively over. And I even think that that inevitability extends to the general election. I mean, we're seeing polls in Michigan, Minnesota, in Georgia that show Donald Trump the closest that he's really ever been to a Democratic challenger this far ahead of the general election. I mean, when you go back and you look at the results of 2020, I mean, there's something like 80,000 votes, across swing states that he needs to pick up. Like, there's a real challenge here that the Biden administration and the Biden campaign doesn't seem to want to acknowledge. I think that they're starting to feel the pressure, and they need to get to that point.
This will be a conversation we will have yet again. And, Joel, you will get your full measure of time when we have a chance to reconvene.
It's their time on the griddle right now.
I appreciate it. Joel Payne and Devin O'Malley, thank you so very much.